Bonjour, bonjour à tous. Soyez les bienvenus.
Good afternoon. Welcome. I think we can get started, so please take your seats. That way we can get going, and that way we'll have enough time to discuss during this session.
So it went over to you, right? Yes.
Est-ce qu'on peut se rassurer que toutes les personnes qui ont besoin d'un casque
So can we just check that everybody who needs a headset has got one? Some of the panelists will speak English. The moderator will speak French.
headsets in case they need one? The session will be held in French and English. However, translation is provided. So if anyone needs a headset, please put your hands up so we can get someone in the room to bring you a headset. Ok, je pense que tout le monde est là. Excellence, Monsieur le Ministre.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, State Minister, representatives of international organizations, distinguished guests, I would like to extend my greetings to you. Welcome to you all. I have the honor and privilege of moderating this session. My name is Ms. Enrique Mitsani-Lorenzo, Cooperation Advisor for the State Minister of Planning, Ministry of Planning for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I will start by introducing the different panelists who will be sharing their experiences with you. And I will ask the panelists to come up to the podiums so that we can start our discussions. Let me start then. Starting with Mr. Stefan Schoenmann, who is the Ambassador and Undersecretary for Development Policy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark. Mr. Schoenmark has been working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 1997, and he has worked in different development and private sector capacities. He has been also working in the spheres of human rights as well as working on issues related to Afghanistan. Please. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Susanna Moorhead to the podium, who is the chair of the OECD Development Assistance Committee. Ms. Moorhead was the head of the committee elected in February 2019 following being in charge of affairs for Ethiopia for Great Britain, and is also the representative of Great Britain for the African Union and for Africa. Welcome. I would now like to call on Ms. Najat Rushdi, who is currently the Special Envoy for Syria, the Deputy Special Envoy for Syria. Ms. Najat Rushdi has been working for the last 20 years in conflict and post-conflict areas, particularly regarding the work that she is currently doing as Special Envoy for Syria. She has also been the Special Joint Coordinator and the Resident Humanitarian Coordinator of the United Nations Office in Lebanon, and was also the peer-to-peer chair of that organization in Geneva. Welcome. Now I would like to call to the podium Mr. Peter Van Sluis, coordinator for the Civil Society Platform for Peace Building and State Building. Mr. Van Sluis is coordinating for peace building and state building on his platform, and this is an international civil society network which consolidates efforts for peace building in fragile states and in states with conflict. Now I would like to call His Excellency Mr. Antonio Freitas, Vice Minister of Finance from Timor-Leste. His Excellency Mr. Freitas is currently Vice Minister of the 8th Constitutional Government of Timor-Leste and has been in post since March 2022. Previously, he has been managing foreign resources, also in the Ministry of Finance, and has also been in charge of development partnerships, as also in the Ministry of Finance, and had also worked in CISAP in Bangkok, Thailand. And now I would like to call to the podium Dr. Helder da Costa, who is the Secretary General of the G7+. Dr. Costa is currently the Secretary General of the G7+, and the G7+ is an international mechanism that is country-driven to be able to draw people's attention on the different issues that are affecting countries in conflict and fragile states. Finally, I would also like us to welcome His Excellency Mr. Abdoulaye Diop, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Mali. Greetings, Your Excellency. His Excellency Mr. Diop is a career diplomat who has shown that he is an experienced negotiator and has more than 20 years of experience. He has held high-level international and national strategic posts, first as the President of the Council of Ministers of the countries of the Sahel, where he played a key role in achieving international support for the force in the Sahel from the G5. Now, finally, I would like to welcome Mr. Ali Sadiq, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Simba Wakulu, who is currently the co-chair of the partnership with Mr. Thomas Gass. Both of them are co-chairs who are both in the room. We would like to greet them. And finally, I would like to start with the Minister of State. Could you please give us your opening remarks, Your Excellency? Ministers, co-chairs of the Global Partnership for an Effective Development Cooperation, Secretary General of the G7+, development partners, participants. Allow me to welcome you to this session, and I would like to express my gratitude for taking the time to be here in this meeting so that we can discuss this topic of strengthening dialogue in fragile and conflict settings. Your participation shows that there is an interest to ensure that we can achieve the SDGs so that we can ensure that concretely we can improve the lives of people, and particularly those living in fragile or conflict settings or vulnerable populations. Ladies and gentlemen, some countries with low and middle incomes face fragile and conflict settings as well as violence. Because of this, they face great obstacles to development, and this puts at risk all the efforts that have been deployed to eradicate extreme poverty. 850,000 people in 23 different countries are facing conflict, whether these are severe or not. There are also an increasing number of people facing food insecurity. Currently, we see that an increasing number of countries where there is a conflict see that their population is also being confronted by food insecurity. And these scourges are having negative impacts on the socio-economic development of these countries. This is leading to the movement of people, and also it requires an increase in humanitarian aid. Economic growth is being compromised. There are increased inequalities, and tackling these must be a global priority. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, because of the issues that are causing fragility, we need to ensure that we have inclusive dialogue that leaves no one behind. We need to ensure trust, because this is the way that we can ensure effective development cooperation in fragile and conflict settings, so as to build resilience and to mitigate fragile and conflict settings. This session aims to look at the mechanisms for dialogue and inclusive partnerships to ensure that there is greater effective development cooperation. Our exchanges will be based on an exchange of experiences between political decision makers and other stakeholders, so that we can find solutions and ensure that we deploy our efforts to help countries emerge from fragile settings. Our discussions will focus on the implementation of effective development cooperation, particularly through the New Deal in fragile and conflict settings. Ladies and gentlemen, ministers, participants, in closing, I would like to call on the speakers to contribute with relevant comments on an inclusive dialogue focusing on partnerships in fragile and conflict settings, as well as proposing solutions so that we can ensure poverty eradication and ensure a virtuous circle of shared prosperity. We need to ensure there really is effective development cooperation. Thank you.
Merci, Excellence, Monsieur le
Thank you, Your Excellency, Minister of State. As was just said by His Excellency, effective development cooperation and sustainable development cooperation in fragile and conflict settings means we need to be effective and ensure that there are partnerships between different stakeholders. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, effective development cooperation needs to be based on inclusive and sustainable dialogue from lessons learned in particularly challenging contexts. And that is why we were here today, so that we can take advantage of your contributions on this subject. The main aim of this session is to look deeper into partnerships and an inclusive dialogue to ensure effective development cooperation so that states are more peaceful and resilient. The main aims of this session are to hear from the different stakeholders and their experiences based on inclusive dialogue, leaving nobody behind, discuss the way Effective development cooperation can lead to trust, can lead to better risk management, so that we can put an end to fragile and conflict. And we need to look at how we can effectively improve national dialogues in countries where there is a fragile or conflict setting. As you have understood, we will be able to discuss these issues after we hear from each and every participant. I would like to start with His Excellency Mr. Ali Al-Sadak, Minister of Foreign Affairs from Sudan, for a brief introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. President, distinguished ministers and heads of delegations, good afternoon. Allow me at the outset to express my gratitude and appreciation to the UNDP for organizing and sponsoring this high-level meeting on effective development cooperation and reinforcing opportunities of dialogue in fragile and conflict-affected states. We believe such meeting would be a great opportunity for a comprehensive and inclusive deliberations on the daunting challenges and to explore options for possible solutions. As this meeting is convened at a time when challenges in fragile conflict-affected states and those in transition have been highlighted. Moreover, the severe negative impact of climate change, as well as regional and international conflict, have further exacerbated the food security and energy crisis, in particular in post-conflict countries and those in transition towards peace, development, and stability. As the requirements of peace and stability are directly linked to those of development, recovery, and reconstruction, Sudan is no exception of other developing and least developed countries in this regard, whose efforts towards achieving the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development are hampered. Therefore, the principle of shared responsibilities must be operationalized through multilateral fora to address such challenges. I am pleased to inform all of you that Sudan has recently made a major progress towards political settlement. On the 5th of this month, the political and military components of the Sudanese revolution have signed a political framework agreement under the auspices of the tripartite mechanism, that is the United Nations, African Union, and IGAD, plus the European Union, and with wide support from international and regional partners. This framework agreement shall pave the way to reach a lasting and inclusive consensus and would enable all parties to form a civilian-led government to run the remaining transitional period with specific mandate, which is enabling Sudanese people to elect their representatives through fair and free elections and to achieve the core objectives of the glorious revolution as enshrined in the motto, freedom, peace, and justice, given that the top priorities of the upcoming government will be to achieve lasting peace, sustainable development, and comprehensive economic reform, as there is no peace without development and no development without peace. Addressing the root causes of conflict can only be achieved through development programs, including the quick impact projects that respond to the immediate needs of the IDPs and refugees, besides the mid and long-term projects, especially in the areas of voluntary return and reintegration. It's worth mentioning that the support of the international community is critical to development, recovery, and reconstruction projects. In the absence of such support, the implementation of any peace agreement, no matter how perfect and acceptable it is, would be impeded and jeopardized unless the beneficiaries and the most affected community categories feel the peace dividends in their daily lives in terms of providing the basic services and public projects such as water, health, and education facilities, in addition to achieving the overall security and stability through the implementation of necessary security arrangements, including disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, the provision of the protection of civilians in accordance with the international standards. The common factor in all peace agreements signed in the conflict-affected states, including my country, is that they comprise chapters or protocols aiming at addressing the outstanding issues, including power sharing and wealth sharing, security arrangements, IDPs and refugees, transitional justice, and land and resources. Therefore, we stress on the important role of the United Nations through its country teams and specialized agencies, namely the UNDP, in supporting conflict-affected and countries in transition through tailored programs that help these countries to overcome these intersected challenges. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour votre intervention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. There are three main points that I have taken from your statement, Minister. Peace and development are linked, and one cannot go without the other. Second, we need a strong support and commitment from the international community to achieve them, and we also need a strong commitment from partner countries. And with that, we can now start the session. We will be dealing with different issues, and we will give the floor to the different panelists so that we can hear from them, so that they can share their experience, give recommendations and comments. The first question is, what are the constraints to inclusive dialogue so that nobody is left behind in fragile contexts? I would like to put this question first to Najat Rojidi, Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, to answer this first question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the answer. Je vais répondre en français, comme ça.
I will answer in French so that we also don't leave French behind. Inclusive dialogue is a fundamental issue, and in fact, it is the backbone of any lasting peace process. It goes beyond any agreement or negotiation, but they are not what take into consideration all the expectations of the populations concerned. You mentioned challenges in your introduction. There is not just Lebanon, there is also Cameroon and the Central African Republic, where I also worked as a resident humanitarian coordinator, and I learned a lot there from the local populations as to what my contribution could be from the UN. And one thing that I did remember was inclusive dialogue. International peace is not for the international community. It is being done for the benefit of the people that are affected, by the people whose stability is being affected by daily conflict. We need to know what these communities want. We want to know what they want in terms of a social contract. There is no peace or stability if we do not speak about the social contract. And as we're speaking about this peace-building process, we need to understand whose responsibilities are what and what duties are of both the citizens and the states. Very often, what I saw was lacking was that this dimension was missing in the discussions. Often, we do not hear from the local communities. The second challenge that we face is going beyond the narrative that is merely based on partnerships. We need to talk about partnerships that are balanced and also equitable. What I saw in these countries where I worked, but also what I saw from different mediators with whom I worked, was that often we see an attitude that does not reflect a balanced or equitable partnership. A balanced and equitable partnership needs to start with people listening to each other. We need to take into consideration what everybody is saying. And we also need to have feedback. What we often do is organize consultations, and then we do listen perhaps, but then we don't go back to consult the same people to get their feedback from all the work that has been done. And this is an iterative element that is vital for us to achieve stability, but it is also a challenge. Often we don't have enough time. Often we have policy and political constraints, and often we do not have enough funding. The third lesson that I learned was that this is a cycle and that nothing can be done from one day to the next. That is impossible. So first of all, we need understanding and an agreement based on inclusive dialogue. And this was underlined by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. There is a shared responsibility. And we also need to ensure that there is shared accountability. That is also key. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Rachidi.
Thank you very much, Madame Rachidi. Yes, I do understand the idea of the backbone. I appreciate that very much. Very often dialogues are horizontal, but a vertical dialogue is crucially important to involve the various local communities. That's what we will retain from your statement: constraints and challenges, the commitment from the state that is lacking, the need to have partnerships, balanced and equitable or fair partnerships, an ongoing dialogue, not a occasional dialogue. What happens after consultations? Do we go back to the vulnerable communities to try to see what the new realities are there? And finally, there's a sense of accountability that really needs to be promoted. Finally, now, the second question. My second question will be addressed to Mr. Antonio Freitas, Deputy Minister of Finance of Timor-Leste. Excellency, Mr. Minister, how can the implementation of the effectiveness principles of development reinforce confidence, success factors, and management of risk to achieve this?
Thank you, moderator, for the question. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be part of this very important dialogue. I'm starting to share some of the experience from Timor-Leste before I answer your question. As we all know, the Timor-Leste went through the number of different conflicts in the past that the cause of the life of our people. We realize the development cannot take place if we continue to have conflict. And then we come in with one slogan. The slogan is telling us the welcome developments and goodbye for conflicts. Therefore, the government Timor-Leste commit to promote dialogue and reconciliation as the most affordable means to resolve the conflicts, not only internally between the Timorese people, but also externally with our neighboring country. Namely, in the past, we have some problem with the Indonesian after the occupation 23 years. Timor-Leste and Indonesia founded the Commission of the Truth and then friendship to find out the truth behind the past conflict in 1999. Today, we have built a good relationship and then collaboration for development of our country. Timor-Leste is proud to have played a leading role and host this G7 Plus headquarters in Delhi. Later on, Dr. Da Costa will explore more how is the G7 Plus contribution to the state fragile situation. Timor-Leste through G7 Plus has shared this experience on dialogue and reconciliation with a member country of the G7 Plus, such as South Sudan, Guinea-Bissau, and Central African Republic. We will continue to promote the importance of dialogue and reconciliation, not only with the G7 Plus member country, but also with other countries in the world. Since the part of the United Nations peacekeeping force in 2012, our country has maintained the peace and stability until today, both internally in the country and externally with our neighboring country. Relate the sum of the experience on the mobilization of external resources. As the post-conflict country, the Timor-Leste, we are adopting most of the resolution as well. The system is applying internationally. Lastly, in the preparation for 2023 budget, we also apply the FCD program, especially on the classification of the economic classification for the budgeting. What I like to put in the table as well to share with you to get some answer for our development partners, especially most of the fragile country, the least development country, we are adopting the policy from international. But what is the based on my experience, because I'm starting working in the Ministry of Finance since 2000, up to now, I just graduated from the technical people 8 months ago, now becoming as the Vice Minister. My question is after some of the fragile country, the LDC country, adopting some policy or even some resolution, but those of the development partner, who is I can say, lecture us, tell us on your policy, but is still not trusting to give more opportunity to those development, I can say, like as the fragile country. In the context of Timor-Leste, we try to put our own foreign aid policy, namely with the three principal issues: country-owned, country lead, and use the country system. But some of I cannot namely one by one, but some of the development partners still allergic to use the country system. Once again, the question is how is the trusting to those, the least developed country, those fragile country, especially how to helping us go out from this situation if the development partner is still in your position not to help the fragile country or the LDC to move and then to overcome the problem we are facing. I thank you.
Merci, Excellence.
Thank you, Excellency. The particularity of Timor-Leste, country in Asia, and as you've been able to see, we are sharing with African partner countries the same challenge. How can we promote these national system? This strengthens, of course, confidence between stakeholders. I would now like to put the same question to Mr. Stefan Schoman, Subsecretary of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Same question.
Let's see. Yeah, you have sound. Thank you so much, moderator, and thank you to all of you for coming to this important event. It's really a pleasure to take part in this very high-level panel. Obviously, an issue that needs our full attention. Just a couple of figures. The fact is that 2 billion people are living in fragile states. That includes 3/4 of the world's extreme poor. 60% of total ODA, Susanna will correct me if need be, was in 2020 provided in fragile context. So it's timely and extremely relevant for us to discuss how can we do better, how can we be more effective in these settings. I'll talk around, I guess, a couple of issues. First, I will take up the baton and talk a little bit more about the importance of trust and dialogue and the importance of engaging all stakeholders, a point that has been made, but let me see if I can add a little bit there. And then I will share some of our own concrete experience. We work in Denmark with a concept that we call doing development differently. It's basically taking the humanitarian development peace nexus and working from there. And I'll try to be concrete and share some examples. Just 2 words on Denmark as a donor. We continue to be a 0.7 donor. We have done that for 48 years, and the plan is to continue. In fact, this year, Denmark is celebrating the 60th anniversary of our development assistance. And there's always been broad political backing in Denmark behind this. So our hope, also with a new government, hopefully materializing within the next few days, is that this will certainly continue. We stand on a strategy, a vision for our development efforts that are twofold. Creating hope for most people living in situations of fragility, conflict, and crisis. That's one, and the other one is fighting for climate, nature, and environment. These are 2 pillars in our strategy, and they're standing on a foundation about human rights and democracy. Now, let's turn to today's issue. How to build trust through dialogue. We did, from the outset, support the New Deal for engagement in fragile states. We had a minister that co-chaired the international dialogue together with the Minister of Finance from Timor-Leste. In the years since that, we've seen, I guess you could easily say, both progress and setbacks. We've seen situations develop fast, both negatively and positively. Sometimes it's been one step forward and many steps back, but luckily also the other way around. Let me share a few concrete examples. In 2014, Denmark hosted the high-level Somalia Partnership Forum. A concrete outcome of that was a new basis for dialogue between international partners and our Somalia colleagues. And that came after a long period of ad hoc relations. There are still many challenges in Somalia, but 8 years after this high-level dialogue, we have seen Somalia re-engage with the international finance institutions. There's agreement to debt relief, and there's IDA funding and other things. These are real, tangible results out of that dialogue. As I said, there are critical issues at stake. Certainly in Somalia, problems are far from gone. Right now, of course, we are looking into a really, really tough food security crisis, also accelerated by climate-related impacts. But these are real successes. And while financial support, as mentioned in this example, is key, our partnership must always be inclusive. We must always engage other actors, whether this is in Somalia or elsewhere. Civil society, civil society will be able to facilitate dialogue and provide ownership and help us to find solutions in ways that others can't. The media is a facilitator and a platform for dialogue. Freedom of expression is under attack many places, but meaningful participation will only work if there is freedom of expression. Women are agents of change. This is fully recognized, not least in the Women, Peace and Security agenda. They must always be part of the dialogue. Youth need to be involved. We saw it at COP27, where they insisted to be part of the plans that are shaping their future. A little bit about our doing development differently, how we work with the humanitarian development peace nexus. This is our approach to strengthen coordination, dialogue, programming, and financing. We were from the start a strong promoter of the OECD DAC recommendations on HDP, and we have tried to walk the talk, so to speak, doing concrete initiatives that follows the HDP approach. One example is our support to Syrian refugees and local host communities in Lebanon. Perhaps you recall that. Also in Jordan and in Iraq. The idea is to help with immediate relief, to boost resilience and promote more durable solutions for refugees, but also for the affected communities. And this happened while we were also supporting the Global Concessional Finance Facility established by the World Bank, allowing the government to strengthen and build capacity in order to also host and help refugee communities on health, on education, and so forth. And mentioning the World Bank, this is one important part of the international community where we have supported as well. The FCV, the Fragility Conflict Violence Agenda, has our full supporting. Only a couple of days back, I learned that the IFC and the UNHCR are now also working together, trying to promote private sector investments and business around refugee and host community issues. So this is very, very important. Now, allow me just to mention that when we were peer-reviewed by the DAC quite recently, our work with the Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus was fully recognized, and we were happy about that. One part was our work to understand local realities and the importance of establishing partnerships at all levels of society. Perhaps the final area, the importance of adaptability in order to manage risk and stay engaged. Development cooperation is never a linear process. This was what I indicated before. It goes in many directions and unfortunately also sometimes very bad. We must be able to constantly work with a dynamic context, allowing us to stay. I mean, we often do long-term agreements, but with a lot of flexibility in there. Of course, there are instances where we need to move away, but then we put our faith in partners such as the UN, the African Union, and others. This is what happened in Afghanistan. We have no presence there, like most of the international community, but luckily a very strong UN system managed to deliver relief and also basic services to the Afghan population. The ability to learn and to adapt to changing context is key. I think this is a very important message for us. We will fail. We can do our best, but sometimes we will fail. This is high risk. We must accept failure, but we must never fail to learn. I think this is a key message. Let me end here just by, again, appreciating the opportunity to engage, to share some of our own experience. Crisis and fragility is many places across the globe. It's making life unbearable hard for millions of people. We must continuously seek to improve our response. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Stéphane.
Thank you very much, Stéphane.
Knowing that you want to put the priority on women and youth. So, thank you very much for this. En effet, nous devons inviter les jeunes.
Yes, we have to invite children, the youth, and women. We'll remember that to the negotiation table. Before I address to the panelists the third question, we would like to hear from His Excellency, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Diop from Mali, on the expectations and hopes for Mali in the context of the fragile situation and emerging from a cycle of conflict. You have the floor, Mr. Diop. Can I speak from here? Does this microphone work? Yes, it does. Good evening to one and all. First of all, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us to this session, and our congratulations to the organizers. Before taking your question, you know that, as was the case for Sudan and other countries in Africa, Mali is a country in transition. We're in a political transition situation, which is supposed to bring us back to constitutional order, the horizon here being for March 2024. The main goal of this transition process is focused on founding once again the state of Mali, the institutional and political reforms to be able to have a lasting government in the country. And the second important point is on the question of security in the country, to be able to create the necessary conditions for returning to normalcy. Now, the issue of cooperation, the issue of development, these issues are also linked to questions of security and peace that are essential. It's a vicious circle. Before tackling this question in a holistic way, for Mali, we wish to avoid falling back into the trap of a perpetual conflict cycle where there are anti-constitutional changes and all sorts of other parameters. We would like to focus our debate today on the role of the state, because in my view, you can't have peace without the state. You can't develop without the state. You cannot even work with civil society if you don't have the state. So once again, we have to, even in a situation where things are very fragile, we have to rebuild the state. This is why what we're saying is, how can we establish the state once again? It's not the central state that I'm talking about. It's the state in all of its dimensions. I'm talking about the local communities and other entities, but how can we have the state at the center of things? I know that there are two or three decades ago, we stressed more to be able to work with civil society, my colleague on my right here, with the local communities, and this is something that we did several decades ago. But this was at the detriment of the state, because people were afraid of fraudulent financial activities. We have to rethink this dimension. We really have to rethink it to see how cooperation for development can sidestep making our states even more fragile. That, in my view, is really the essence of this. You cannot shelve the state and get down to work. My colleague stressed the population, for example. Once again, we have to have the people at the center, the people and the state at the center, and then all stakeholders must be able to contribute. Civil society, local communities give a voice to men and women. But we find ourselves in a situation in some countries, we even talk about the private sector. Well, when things are fragile, the private sector is no longer present. And there are many stakeholders that are simply not present as well. So automatically the state must be there to play a very active role pending a return to normalcy. For me, the fact that one is in a fragile situation should not be a carte blanche to do whatever one wants to do. I think we have to help states to rebuild the state. For Mali, let me just give you an example. The greatest security problem that we have is that we have entire pockets of countries that have absolutely no state control. And terrorist groups have exploited these non-state actors, criminal groups. They've all taken groups of people hostage, and that is what has led to the expansion of terrorism. For us, the essential objective for countries such as Mali is how can we restore the authority of the state on all of the territory so that the state as a democratic, inclusive entity can organize this entire process. So if I have a message that I can share with everyone is, once again, I would highlight how essential this element is. Now, let me go to the second part of my point of view. We spent more than 10 years, and we realized that most of our proposals for solutions were being imported from the outside, or had been imported from the outside. Today, people in Mali are saying we want to gain control of our country once again, take ownership once again, a vision for the future. So it's important for all partners who come, they have to be able to make sure that their action fits with the vision that the country has. And in this case, we've defined 3 main principles in Mali to be able to work with everyone. Number 1, we would like to have respect for the sovereignty of our country. Number 2, respect for the strategic and partnership choices of Mali. And number 3, one has to take into account the vital interests of the people of Mali in all of the decisions taken. So everyone who comes to help us, whether you're talking about development partners or civil societies, if you put your activities within this framework, then we can work together. Once again, for us, it's the state, the central role of the state in the promotion of everything that we do, a state which organizes, an organizing state. The second thing is you have to fit within our vision. If the partnership and the dialogue, well, that means that we have to listen to one another, to each other. We have this consideration. We have to make sure that indigenous people, for example, have a better understanding of their problem. They may be lacking resources, but let's hear their voice. Let's give them a possibility to express themselves. So for me, a partnership can either aggravate our problem or it can help. But if the partners fit within this approach, I think that we will be able to take some positive steps forward. All partners will be working together and the state will be placed at the center of our actions. The national appropriation process is a key element which has to happen. We have to have the authority of the state on the entire territory, and that is an essential objective goal for Mali, but for Sudan as well, and many other countries that are in the Sahel, where we're dealing with all kinds of problems. There's transnational crime, there's climate change, there are all sorts of challenges. Thank you very much.
Merci, Excellence, pour la.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your statement. Well, from this statement, well, we can see that actually things are shared. There's the duty of the state to build, to guarantee that there's good, sustainable governance, to offer security and peace to its population. But on the other hand, we invite the partners to align with the vision of the countries that benefit from the assistance. Now, finally, we will move to the third and last question. Let's say after the New Deal and the existing processes such as the international dialogue on the consultation for peace and the construction of a state as a platform dedicated to supporting these efforts, what are the possible areas for an effective dialogue at the national level that will take into account the specific nature of fragile environments as a confidence factor? So we'd like to hear, first of all, from G7+ to get the view of fragile countries. Please go ahead.
Thank you, moderator. First of all, I'd like to thank the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation for organizing this summit. And also I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my political leaders from my constituency, the G7+ ministers, especially from the chairing country, the Deputy Minister of Economic Development from Sierra Leone, and also Deputy Minister of Finance from Timor-Leste, the host country. and also Minister of State from DRC, is a founding member of G7 plus countries. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk about, to answer your question on what are the possible directions for improvement. Since yesterday up to now, when listening to the interventions from different actors and political leaders and those who are engaged in effective development cooperation, I'm humbled to say that I was also personally engaged in this launching of the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States in Busan 11 years ago in 2011. And yet, and I still see my colleagues from the Global Partnership, and I think my colleague Gerardo from Mexico, you're one of the Sherpas, together with the other 18 Sherpas. We discussed about the Busan Partnership document, which gave birth to this principle of mutual accountability and transparency and so on. And yet, when I listen to those conversations since yesterday, even Raj Kumar mentioned that in the opening session yesterday, that majority of aid is still tight, controlled by donors, failed to help mobilizing investment, and hence our needs are growing. This is reality. Now, and also the theme that really emerged from these 2 days conversation is all about trust. In 2011, we discussed about this, the trust, and this trust element is enshrined in the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States. There is a principal focus, there is a principal trust that development partners need to subscribe and to be able to help those fragile and conflict-affected states. Now, these New Deal principles that we agreed upon after an intensive negotiation in Busan, they were rooted in member countries' perspectives. And I remember after listening to His Excellency the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Mali, it rings the bells that it reminds me of a former Minister of Finance of South Sudan. He said this during the launching of the New Deal in Busan. In 5 words, I repeat, in 5 words, nothing about us without us. That is the spirit of the New Deal. That in the spirit of this partnership, this development cooperation, the effective aid effectiveness and so on, you cannot succeed without engaging the development actors and the leaders of those fragile and conflict-affected states. That's what the New Deal is all about. In the ensuing period of 3, 4 years, 5 years down the track after 2011, many countries of G7 Plus implemented, monitored, and conducted fragility assessment. And yet, those fragility assessments, some of them were validated at the Council of Ministers level, some of them were implemented successfully, and others are having mixed results. Those are from the perspective of G7 plus countries. I now challenge our colleagues from the development partners. 11 years ago, 45 plus countries and organizations subscribed to this New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States. They all were committed in Busan that we are going to adopt this principle of New Deal, country-led and country-owned development perspective. But now, since yesterday until today, we still talk about the trust being eroded between the state institutions and the local population. The trust is eroded between leaders of the G7 plus countries and the development partners. This is really sad story for us. We're supposed to celebrate 11 years after the New Deal. We're supposed to celebrate milestones, despite the efforts that have been done by both sides, both from the development partners and the G7 plus countries. On a positive note forward, ladies and gentlemen, the Vice Minister of Finance was too modest to say this, but allow me to say this on his behalf. That one of the elements that is successful in the Timor-Leste case is that 2 development partners, Australia in particular, and the European Union, are brave enough to support direct budget support to the budget of the national of Timor-Leste. This is a really revolutionary the heroic effort from those developing countries. And to me, this also reminds me of another former minister of finance from Liberia. He said this in one of the summits in Nairobi of the GPEDC. He said this: you ought to test the pipe before you know it is leaking, which means that donors, you have to take the risk by putting your resources to the country system of the particular country that you're supposed to help. But if you avoid by reversing, by not putting your resources, that means that you are having this perceived risk of not putting your resources into the particular country. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a fact. Yeah? But in order to do that, allow me also to highlight some of the facts that we face after 7 years of implementation of the Agenda 2030 and after 11 years of the New Deal. That fragile countries continue to be the home of 73% of extremely poor people in the world, according to the latest State Fragility report that was released by the OECD in September this year, led by Ms. Susanna Moorhead from the OECD. Out of 60 fragile countries, 15 of them are in extreme fragile situations. And of the 53 contexts with acute food insecurity, 48 of them are in fragile situations. And sadly, no fragile country is on track to achieve critical sustainable development goals that is only 7 years to go. So how can we restore this? I don't have the bullet answer, but let me offer our humble perspective on this. That the global peace and shared prosperity rests in peace and fragile stability, and in fragile countries, including Mali, South Sudan, Afghanistan, DRC, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, you name it. Those countries who are, in fact, facing the situations of conflict and fragility. So in the spirit of leaving no one behind, it is the issue of the transversal theme of the Agenda 2030. So if we want to talk about this effective partnership, development cooperation, one thing we need to restore trust at the country level. And that has to start with dealing with the political leaders, the leaders democratically elected by the people in that particular country. Second, the trust between the state institutions and citizens is a precondition to sustaining peace. I'll give you an example. If there is a particular donor who's helping a particular country, if you don't trust the particular government, and the consequence is that the citizens of the particular country will have the eroded faith and trust to the legitimate government because you are not putting resources into this system. And third, we're talking about the IDPs. What is the future of IDPs? I know that Peter is here, is going to, from CSPPS, is going to say a few words. This is a platform of a tripartite dialogue between the donors, the G7+, and the civil society platform. But what is happening is that the IDPS is fading away. It's not lifting up to the game. So I'm challenging the co-chairs, in particular the co-chairs from Canada, in this case, to lift the game up so that we can talk about countries that are really facing fragile and conflict situations around the world. You name it, Haiti, Mali, not even G7+ countries, but we can also talk about it, Syria, Yemen, so Afghanistan, and so on. Where is the role of the IDPS? I don't see this, despite the effort that we are planning to promote the country dialogue in our respective countries. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Costa. Vous avez mentionné lors.
You mentioned the courage of partners like Australia and the EU and regarding Timor-Leste, and now I would like to give the floor to the director of the Committee of Age Development, Madam Susan Moorhead.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is clearly very complicated, and I'm actually really pleased that we're having quite an honest discussion because I think quite a lot of the panels I've been on the last couple of days have been a little too rosy. So let's really try and bottom this out. I mean, as Stefan said, the majority of ODA is going into fragile places. Now that, in many ways, is a great pity, because I think we would all rather be investing in success, but we can't do that. So we put most of our resources into fragile places, and it's very expensive for lots of reasons. We have made some progress, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, but also, there are failures and there is a long way to go. Now, Stefan talked about the DAC's Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus. This is really quite simple. It's just saying, can we together, government, partners, the multilateral system, break down the silos and join up the humanitarian life-saving interventions with the longer-term development interventions, and critically investing in peace, because less than 2% of ODA is invested in peace, and that is not nearly enough. I would add two other elements, and particularly reflecting what His Excellence from Mali said, which is you've actually got to invest in the politics and the state, and you've got to invest diplomatically as well, diplomatically within countries, within the region, within the neighborhood. And I think one of the things that donors have to get much better at is rolling up their sleeves to help support local political processes. Support, yeah, this is locally driven, it's your sovereignty, you're right, but it's very, very difficult to do anything constructive if you're not prepared to get politically engaged. On this question of budget support, and actually several years ago I was delighted to be in Kinshasa and was asked by your then Prime Minister if the British government would start doing budget support in DR Congo. Now, we were investing a huge amount there, not general budget support, and I had to say, I don't think so right now. Why? Because we had to demonstrate that this money would go to the places where we said it would go. And I'll be perfectly honest, at that point, and this was many years ago, we didn't feel it could do that. So instead, if you like, it was a different approach. We invested in local community projects, in systems, but with different mechanisms. Now look, realistically, if we take Afghanistan, I don't think it's very easy to invest in government systems where that government is saying little girls should not be allowed to go to school. Now, I mean, that is the harsh reality. And members of the Development Assistance Committee feel very, very strongly that there is no development without having gender equality. There is no development without having women and girls at the center of it. So I would be doing you a disservice if I said that I thought governments that had those kinds of views were likely to have resources put through government systems. I don't think that would be responsible, frankly. So the politics are really complicated, and what we have to do is engage with them and to try and see how donors can support the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals to which we have all signed up in fragile places. Now, as to the different dialogues, and a lot of people have said, very sensible things about this, it seems to me that the places we're talking about are already very overloaded with, just keeping basic systems and services going, with often managing rather a lot of development partners, with trying to keep peace and security in the country. I think a lot of parallel dialogues are not the best way to go. So when we talk about an inclusive dialogue, there is much to be said for bringing together, if there is an existing IDPS dialogue, if the UN is running something, the government will be running something, civil society will be running something. Quite rightly, we've said that women's voices are very rarely adequately incorporated into mainstream formal dialogues. So to somehow bring all this together, because, I mean, as Madame Rossi said, it's not linear. You often go round in circles, but at least to have a single conversation that is inclusive makes it more manageable. So I wish I could answer all your challenges, but I mean, I'm honest enough to say I can't. I think what the DAC does do is to learn from collective mistakes. So there is something called the Nexus Academy, which is co-run by the OECD and UNDP. And this is basically bringing people like you and the people who work for you together online to say, this works, this actually was a real disaster, so don't do that. If you need some help trying to do that, this person has done it. So that's one really practical thing. And the second is we have a network of expertise in working in fragile and conflict-affected places. And again, it's sharing that, it's learning from your experience and trying to nudge this forward. I mean, if there were an easy solution, I think we would have found it, but there is no silver bullet. So we just have to keep on trying. And certainly from the point of view of the DAC, you know, we spend a huge amount of our time discussing how to work more effectively in conflict and fragile affected places, because that is where the poorest people in the world live. And unless we can continue to do better on this, we're never going to achieve the SDGs. Thank you.
Alors, si
If you were asking what 30 years of experience was like, well, here you've seen the answer. We understand that her rich background and her determination for rural Africa has paid off. We have heard the voice of fragile countries, of the work regarding development and DAC. We've heard from civil society. I'm going to ask Mr. Peter van Blush to answer the same question.
Moderator and Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, it's a pleasure to be part of this fascinating panel. It's always difficult to speak as a last person in a panel when so many brilliant people have made very interesting remarks, which I'm tempted to respond to. But allow me to first go to my intended speaking points. As already referenced, the landmark agreement 10 years ago, which was signed, which was the New Deal for Engagement in the Fragile State, recognized the need to change development policies and practices towards conflict-affected states. It emphasized that supporting development and pathways towards a more resilient future need to be nationally owned and led and spearheaded by inclusive planning and governance processes. The New Deal was a result of the International Dialogue for Peace Building and State Building and agreed upon, as already referenced, in 2011, the Busan Summit on Aid Effectiveness, and was a response to the realization that many conflict settings were lagging behind on the, at that time, Millennium Development Goals. The New Deal was a key agreement which proposed peace building and state building goals and identified commitments and principles to build mutual trust and to achieve impactful results. The international dialogue's aim was to support those countries in their efforts to exit fragility and strengthening their resilience by seeking ways to provide better technical, political and financial support, and through facilitating dialogue, policy development and experience sharing. As a partnership, the IDPS was a leading voice also for the inclusion of Goal 16 on peaceful, just and inclusive societies in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, acknowledging the indivisibility of peace and development and the centrality of inclusive and responsive governance mechanisms in this context. Now, in an increasing polarized world characterized by the erosion of trust, institutions and civic space, the IDPS partnerships aims to build momentum for sustainable peace. in alignment with also the new agenda for peace as proclaimed by the Secretary General. Allow me to also share a few reflections on the setting in which this dialogue is operating, and then also answer the question that the moderator posed in front of us. I think that the recently embarked upon new phase in the international dialogue provides an opportunity to rekindle the partnership to work around country-level engagement. There is a need for a reinvigorated and ongoing dialogue at the country level that focuses on an ongoing, inclusive process that values the importance of this dialogue happening. An inclusive dialogue that focuses on identifying possible actions that to lead to measurable results. That recognizes also and builds on different complementary roles of all actors, so is inclusive also in recognition that what partners can bring to that process. A process of dialogue that addresses the challenges of a country is confronted with and provides safe spaces to address grievances and also tries to identify solutions. The dialogue should also manifest a commitment to uphold and where possibly enlarge civic space, because civic space is endangered in many of the contexts in where we try to act as a partner in development. The dialogue process should also provide space for country exchanges to support effective advancements of global policy frameworks, as well as elevating local voices in global policy making efforts. More importantly, in order to foster trust and national cohesion, as well as tackle the complexity of current day problems, such national dialogues require multi-actor solutions. By bringing together government actors, civil society, the private sector and other affected stakeholders, especially the most marginalized, such as women and youth, the outcomes of the dialogue must carry more sustainable solutions to address the causes of fragility and conflict. As already mentioned, transitioning out of fragility is a long political endeavor that requires country leadership and ownership. Processes of political dialogue often fail due to the lack of trust, inclusiveness, and leadership. The inclusion of civil society should therefore not be tokenistic, but it should be implemented in a meaningful, predictable, continuous, and sustainable manner. As already also mentioned, conflicts are never linear, and also in this process, the inclusion needs to be continuously adapted to changing circumstances, especially important in a fragile context. Civil society organizations play a critical role in identifying who is left behind, ensuring to support them and to raise their voices to the adequate policy levels. All too often, we see civil society's role in the policy spaces and consultation processes as an add-on, tokenistic and not truly representative. This not only hampers truly effective solutions, but it also fails to recognize the value contribution civil society is bringing. Often civil society act as a first responder at the forefront of crisis emerging. Their involvement in policy space has been pivotal in developing and implementing policy frameworks and shaping new global agendas. Their linkages with different communities, including the most marginalized, and their ability to translate the needs to the policy level is indispensable in our efforts for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The efforts of local peace-building organizations and their actors as in prevention programs must also be robustly resourced. And therefore, to conclude, to improve the effectiveness of dialogue at country level, our best bet is not to only protect civic space, but to nurture it and to allow it to grow. For fragility is best countered by building trust and fostering localized in-country collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Peter. Now, after having heard all the statements by the panelists, we are going to hear comments and questions from the public. And we will see if anybody online has a question. So to begin, I'd like to ask Madame Michelle Signas, the Administrator of the United States. I'll give you the floor, Madam.
Thank you so much for this really interesting panel and for the thoughtful conversation that we've had. I think that this is really important, and we are at a especially critical juncture as we face compounding crises such as rising food insecurity, resurgent authoritarianism, corruption, and that there is just deepening vulnerability in fragile contexts. And so, as you all have said, we agree that it is time to rethink how we work in fragile and conflict-affected places. And I'd like to just offer 3 thoughts about how we might reduce fragility and how we might advance sustainable development in this difficult time. First, we really do believe that we should sharpen our focus on peace building and strengthening the peace pillar of the humanitarian development peace nexus. We must expand our dialogue with peace and security actors, especially civil society and local partners who can sustain or spoil sustained peace. We must listen to them, we must hear them, and we must take action. Second, we should create spaces to better sequence, layer, and co-locate our efforts across sectors. The challenges we face today are simply too great for any one organization or nation to take on, and we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate across donors. We need to collaborate with multilateral organizations. We need to collaborate with our CSO partners on the ground. And we need to think about how our resources are layered on top of each other. As happened in some of the other panels where people talked about financing, where we're so siloed that we end up creating programs that make no sense. And third, we really believe that we need to shift the balance of power and resources to local actors who really know what's happening on the ground. And we need to look for ways to hold that microphone close to them, to amplify their voices, and make sure that their ideas, their thoughts are included in the processes and in the strategies and structures, and no one is left out, ignored. One of the panelists talked about including youth, including women. I would also argue we need to include LGBTQI, disability communities, and other indigenous communities. And oftentimes they are just not able to come to the tables that we create, so we need to create tables where they are. Within the United States, I just wanted to share that we have put in place a powerful toolkit that's based on the U.S. Global Fragility Act, which was enacted in 2019, which has a core set of principles. It requires that we work across our development, our defense, and our diplomacy institutions, that we bring in all of our whole of government pieces, and that we work collaboratively with governments and civic partners on an integrated approach to prevent conflict, promote the resilience and stability we need, and advance economic development. I'm happy to report that in Q1 of 2023, we will be announcing those countries, we will be announcing the strategies and the processes, and we'll be talking to our donor partners, multilateral partners, CSO partners about how we can all work together. We are changing the way we do business in the United States, and we hope that others will join us. I just want to reiterate the point that we really do believe that local actors in fragile and conflict-affected countries are the connective tissue, and we need their buy-in, their voices, their leadership as we try to move things forward. They bring legitimacy to these processes, and without them, we will not be successful. So thank you for allowing me a few moments, and thank you to the panel for such thoughtful comments.
Merci, Madame Somilas.
Thank you, Madame Somilas, for these 3 tracks of leading to solutions, and also for this appeal to developed countries. Before I take questions, I would like to ask Mr. Thomas Gass, the President, for his comments or questions, and then we will open the floor to questions. Thank you for a very lively discussion. I think it's very important for us to put on the table our problems, the quandaries that we have in collaborating in terms of development partnerships. We're constantly compelled to convince our contributors that investment is worth it, and that what they hear in the media may be making them very nervous, but nonetheless, Now, when we work closely with local populations and in certain territories, we can find areas where there is more trust. And I'd like to give you an example, because with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mali, I'd like to give you an example that for us in Switzerland is very worthy. Almost a tripartite collaboration with the central government and territorial collectivity, where we give budgetary aid to this territory together with the central government. And we invest in bolstering the capacity of management in the territory without trying to stand in for these players. Thank you.
Merci, Excellence.
Thank you, Excellency. Thomas Glass. We have a question there.
Oui. Si vous pouvez d'abord vous présenter avant de poser.
Could you state your name and affiliation, please?
Shoaib Al-Zakir. I'm the chief of technical. I'm the chief of technical office at the Ministry of Planning and Intercooperation in Yemen. I haven't seen much given to a country in conflict, so I'm going to just shed some lights on certain issues regarding the development cooperation and how it played a big role in Yemen to face different shocks and challenges that we're facing, and what has worked well and what needs to be improved. The first thing that before we talk about trust and everything, when the conflict or the war hits a country, you see the development partners, the international community, they just leave that country and they stop engaging. So the first thing that I would like to shed light on is that they should stay engaged in development. Yes, they do engage themselves in humanitarian and so on, but engagement in development is very important, because the disengagement after that pays a high cost. And we have seen good results after 2 years, 3 years from the conflict in Yemen and the shocks that we are facing, that multilateral banks and institutions like the World Bank, who never intervenes in a country in a conflict, have started to invest in that, in the country, and it proves right, and they are imitating the same experience in other countries. We have seen bilateral donors like the DFID, the GIZ, the USAID, and so on and so forth. They have, and the European Union, they have started investing directly in local institutions. What I mean by that, that rather than bringing third-party institutions to implement, and the third-party institutions bring fourth-party and fifth parties, it's very important to stay engaged and to mitigate risk rather than avoid risk. Number two, it's very important to invest in human capital. Human capital, when you deal with human capital and building human capital, you are dealing with crisis within the crisis in that country. It might be difficult to deal with education and so on for certain reasons and for certain political in the country of the donating countries, but there are other ways to go about it. We have some religious group that control certain part of the country, and we are worried about the education system, the way they deal with women, and so on. But there are other ways in terms of investment in human capital infrastructure, especially digital infrastructure. We have reached those women, those children, especially children, and we managed to change their minds through digital infrastructure and proper education. Just these 2 points. There are other points that we might share in the application of the GBETC. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Habib Mayer. I'm from G7 Plus Secretariat. Just a quick comment. I agree with Ms. Susanna about we will not be able to provide support through the government, which is not legitimate and which does not respect the human rights. However, we could have avoided the collapse of an elected government and hence a state had the international community trusted in the institution that they built for 20 years in Afghanistan. And I think this is a lesson that we all can learn, that if we do not trust in the institutions and if we do not trust in the state that we are supporting, the states will collapse. And when the state collapses, as His Excellency Minister of Mali mentioned, then we cannot sustain peace, we cannot sustain stability, the needs will increase. I think this is one of the bitter lessons that we all as international community have to learn from the case of Afghanistan. I hope it's not repeated anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup pour...
Thank you very much for the questions. Let's take one last question, last statement to allow panelists to react very swiftly since we've gone over the time a little bit. Yes, please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. My name is Longue. Come from Republic of Congo. We understand the clear link between peace, security, and development. I wanted to mention that our country is facing aggression from one of its neighbors, and here, contrary to everything which has been prescribed, the principle of the Charter of the United Nations. Now, it was mentioned earlier that we have to strengthen diplomacy. I think that beyond shoring up diplomacy, beyond that, it's also a good thing to condemn a number of acts that are violating very clearly the principle of the United Nations, sovereignty of our country. That's the first thing. The second thing is with the consequences of an aggression like we are experiencing today, you simply say that you have consequences that are quite dramatic. We're talking about the displacement of people, on the biodiversity of nature, and everything which has which involves famine, for example. I'd like to say that when we talk about strengthening regional diplomacy, we have to recall also clearly that acts that violate the principles of the United Nations should be condemned, because that is essential so that the cooperation and development will be effective. Thank you very much. I will take one last question. I have someone who had his hand up for quite some time.
My name is Anton Martinov. I'm from Bulgaria and working with CPD and Taiboni International. My work is focused mainly on SDG 16. And we have working on a few case studies in conflict and fragility regions. It's too difficult to engage the local people from civil society to make researches. Your Excellency, Stefan, I'm sorry, forget your family, mentioned about the involvement of civil society and people who are on the field in the processes of development of democracy and etc. We have a lot of cases of people who are engaged in these processes, who are become victims. Some of them are not already alive. Others just disappeared. And my question is, what support? What support and what are the guarantees for security for these people? From other side, what is your opinion about that? Usually, international institutions are working to reduce the consequences of the escalation of the conflicts, mainly in frozen conflicts. In active conflict zones, there is chaos and too difficult to work. But how are the mechanisms, and do you think we need a new mechanisms and more obligatory system of United Nations resolutions, international agreements to the countries in these regions, because they just not follow this international legislation. Thank you.
Merci. Merci à tous. Merci.
Well, thank you to all of you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the recommendations. We're going to try to quickly give an opportunity to panelists to react. First and foremost, I'd like to ask Madam Najat Rushdi to react to the proposals that we've heard, dialogue mechanisms that have been suggested by Saidi.
Yes, please.
You know, I mean, beyond reacting or reflecting on what USID suggested, there are facts. When we know that 2% only is invested in peace, it says a lot about the kind of gaps we need really to address. And I think if we bring that to prevention, it's even worse. And we keep talking about prevention, but at the end of the day, if there is a big failure of all of us, to all of us, is really the prevention, for many reasons. And again, you know, I'm a United Nations staff, and it's really great that you are able to speak very frankly, but it shows also already a collective commitment. So let us start by addressing the facts and the gaps. And is there really a political will at the level of all the actors? And I don't think the issue is only with the donors. The issue is with everybody. And we have a collective responsibility and a collective accountability. So let us discuss seriously about that, but also understanding and accepting the challenges and the constraints of others. And frankly, this discussion is still to happen, and we need to have the platform to have this kind of discussion. The second thing, it's really, you know, we have to be consistent. And you know, I love what you said, nothing about us without us, which for me summarizes very clearly what the inclusive dialogue is about. And frankly speaking, we are still in the 21st century mentioning that we need to bring the women, we need to bring the youth, we need to bring the disabled, it means that we failed again, because we are still in the situation, we are still asking for it. And as long as we still have to ask for it, we failed. We have the right to fail, but we cannot fail the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, Madame Najat.
Thank you, Ms. Najat. I would like to have a couple of reactions from Mali. First of all, the first reaction is about the statement that was made by Thomas Gass, His Excellency Thomas Gass, about how to strengthen vertical confidence when there is cooperation with decentralized authorities. That's the first question. The second comment that was made that I would like His Excellency Minister for Foreign Affairs of Mali to respond to is the following. We talked about strengthening confidence between the various stakeholders in development. How can one strengthen that confidence when there is a lack of support, or as it was put by the delegate of the DRC, a lack of condemnation of certain acts that are condemned by international organizations and decried by them? Mali speaking, thank you very much for the contribution from my colleague from Switzerland. I think it is absolutely crucial for us to work together. And I welcome the example that he has provided to us, because precisely many feel that when we work in civil society or with the local communities, we have to do it without the state or against the state. What's essential is that it should be, even if it's decentralized cooperation, it should be in the framework, within the framework of a dialogue. Now we, the state, are very interested in having our populations benefit. And it should be done whilst building confidence among the stakeholders. And with Switzerland, we have that type of cooperation, but it is certified, if you will, by the state, and the local communities can benefit from this support and are able to work. So we have to understand that the local stakeholders, civil society, men, women, all must be at the table, and the table must be an inclusive entity to make it possible to identify these priorities. And it's the local communities. A representative of the state must be playing the role of a stakeholder. Now, for the last question, I'm afraid I didn't quite understand it. Well, I'm going to try to reformulate it then for you. The delegate of the DRC deplored the fact that there's a lack of condemnation by international organizations when there is aggression against the sovereignty of certain countries, and the very same organizations are contributing assistance to developing countries, and they're the same organizations where we would expect a little more commitment and support from. So how can we strengthen or build confidence between those organizations and we, the benefits of assistance, of aid? Well, I think that, as our president has indicated, the respect for the sovereignty of countries is absolutely essential in any cooperation. It means that we have confidence. We trust that the countries with which we work, they should have the provision of the ability to identify problems and contribute solutions. And they understand that it's their country. In Mali, we consider that no one can love our country more than we love it. So their involvement side by side with us, yes, is excellent. And as my colleague said, in countries such as Afghanistan, when you have difficult situations, some partners might decide they have to leave. But we don't have any other place to go. It's our country. So when we try to find solutions, we want durable solutions, lasting solutions. But sovereignty is not exclusive. It doesn't mean that we don't want others to intervene, but it should be done in the spirit of partnership and mutual respect and humility as well. Solutions that come from outside are not always the best ones. They can be used as inspiration, but solutions from outside should not be imposed on the country. So what I mean to say is that at the level of the international community, it is crucially important to respect the choices that countries make, as was said. Countries might make a mistake, but they have to learn from their own mistakes. Thank you. Thank you, Excellency. Well, we're moving towards the end of our little ceremony. We have very little time. We're going to take one single question from the virtual audience. It is for Dr. Da Costa of the G7+.
Support South-South and triangular cooperation and the challenges for the Agenda 2030. Yeah, sure. How can fragile to fragile cooperation support South-South and triangular cooperation and the challenges for the Agenda 2030?
Thank you for the question from the audience. It's a very good question, thank you. With the G7+, we coined a cooperation called F2F, cooperation, fragile to fragile cooperation. It's a subset, or it is a unique platform of cooperation within the South-South and triangular cooperation. It has existed over the past 8 years or so. And this F2F cooperation, it is built on homegrown solutions. We talk about solutions here rather than imported solutions. They are homegrown solutions. And this F2F cooperation is focused on in the domain of peace and reconciliation, dialogue, public financial management, and elections. You know that in most of African countries, when they have elections, are always contested. And the potential for violence, potential for crisis emerge out of elections is very high. So we use this kind of F2F cooperation to help each other from one country to help other countries within the G7+. And it works. And I dare to say that this F2F cooperation is now being recognized by the big G7, the industrialized countries, in their meeting in Biarritz in France in July 2019. That they recognize that this F2F cooperation, the value of the work that we did. Now, in order to answer your question, Mr. Moderator, is that yes, it does help to provide calming effect to those countries. And that's why recently we took many member states, countries, participants to Rwanda. I know that Rwanda and DRC have a very not so rosy relationship right now. But despite the political situations, I'm just saying that from the F2F cooperation, Rwanda is considered as a successful country in terms of trajectory of development over the past 28 years. And that's why the G7 Plus learn out from this. How can they build their own institutions, promote peace and reconciliation at the national level, and this is something that we contribute to within the G7 Plus, and hence, by default, we also contribute to the lasting peace within the goal number 16 of the Agenda 2030. Thank you.
Yes, Excellency. I'll be in trouble if I refuse to let you speak. Excellency, if you can just have 1 minute and then we can conclude,
just 1
please.
minute. I just want to react to the recent speaker. I am about fragile to fragile cooperation. We in Sudan is the chair of IGAD today for the last couple of years, and we had a meeting in Khartoum, the ministerial at the ministerial level of IGAD foreign ministers, and we have adopted this. We want, because if we look at a country like Somalia, for over 40 years, there is no government, there is no state, you see. If we look at every year drought, every year hunger in Ethiopia and South Sudan. So yes, there was help from the international community, but it was very little. It didn't do anything. So we adopted the policy of finding solutions of the area among ourselves, and we are going to hold a meeting very soon on how to do this, how to go about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. We've reached the end of the session and the dialogue. I would like to thank every one of you for your participation and your time, and wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you very much.
If you allow me
Merci,
just
Excellence.
1 second,
Merci.
I would like to invite you. You will have next door in the upcoming 2 hours the possibility to have a drink and eat something. I know some of you have still meetings, but it will be open.